As Bill said, my name is Sam Jackson. I'm with Genera Energy. We're a company that's based in Eastern Tennessee, and he gave you a really good overview of what biomass logistics are and kind of the sector of the marketplace that they cover. So I'm a little bit different in that my company is actually implementing these for customers, both on the biofuel side as well as the bioproduct, biochemical side. So hopefully through my presentation today, you'll get a little bit more of an implementation view, so to speak, in addition to what Bill introduced the concept as. So our company provides turnkey biomass supply chain solutions to our end customers. We do everything from landowner recruitment, agricultural production of dedicated energy crops, all the way through the transportation, logistics, and pre-processing of that material outside the plant gate. We've done that all across the country for a variety of different products. And Bill mentioned bioproducts. That is a significant component to our customer base, is looking at biochemicals and bioproducts production from these crops in addition to fuels. In many cases, the fuels actually wind up being the lower margin, higher volume product, whereas the chemicals and other products that come out of that supply chain are much higher value. So Genera's concept, though, is custom developed, tailored supply chain solutions. For each of our customers, we want to make sure that we achieve all of the operational and cost efficiencies we can, and make sure that both the end partner, the conversion partner, receives the biomass that they need with the right characteristics, while the farm producer earns a return to the land as well. Today, you're going to hear multiple presentations about different types of biomass sources and in different logistical systems. And I would say that none of us are wrong. They're all very regionally, if not even project specific to the end customer. These crops don't work everywhere, nor do residues, but they all have a place in the marketplace. And I would say that none of us are completely right either. We're still learning through this process. So hopefully today you'll hear kind of a broad spectrum. Genera focuses on dedicated energy crops, so crops that are purpose grown for the end use. We've done a significant amount of residue harvesting and processing, things like corn stover and wheat straw, but that's not the core of what we do. Typically, we focus on three key categories of dedicated energy crops. Perennials, so most of you have heard of switchgrass and miscanthus and things of that nature. That's kind of a core of our business, crops that you plant once and they come back for 15 to 20 years regularly without replanting, so significant sustainability benefits of that. We also deal with annual crops, things like biomass sorghum, sweet sorghum, and even tobacco, with some of the new genetic advances in tobacco. For those of you that are familiar, most tobacco is about waist high in the field when we're harvesting it for leaves. Biomass tobacco is 12 feet tall in the field. So very, very significant and some neat things coming along there. But that mix of perennial and annual becomes very important as well. We get some flexibility in land use that way, so we can ramp up supply, back down supply as we need to with annual crops, and it provides a lot of flexibility. And then the third category that we deal with are predominantly short rotation woody crops, the hybrid and the poplar, the hybrid poplar and the hybrid willows that Bill introduced are a core component to what we do as well. They have a significant fit in particular regions of the country, and particularly the southeast where we're at. And so we've worked quite a bit with those for our customers. So when I think about logistics, just as Bill said, it's everything from that crop standing in the field to whoever uses it at the end of the day, and everything that happens in between. And there's a lot of complexity there. So I just kind of want to touch very quickly on what the advantages of some of these dedicated energy crops are. First of all, dedicated energy crops offer significant volume per acre. By harvesting more tons of biomass per acre, we reduce the overall collection cost and typically reduce a lot of the other supply chain costs. So with some of these crops, we're getting anywhere from 6 to 8 to 10 dry tons per acre per year, and that's a very significant volume. There's not many other things out there that will yield those types of tonnages on an annual basis. And so by condensing the number of tons per acre and increasing that, we reduce the overall acres required and thus reduce the overall collection radius and reduce transportation costs. The bioenergy crops also allow us to do some quality control through crop selection and harvesting. We can actually select crops based on their chemical composition to best fit the end user's needs. As a matter of fact, we've done that with a couple of projects now where we've been able to actually select a specific crop that had a very low level of a specific inorganic component that disrupted the conversion process, and so it was an optimized crop coming right out of the field. And then the other thing about dedicated energy crops is they do open new regions to biomass production. You're going to hear about corn stover harvesting today. Very important component to the biomass supply, but it typically only works in the grain belt. When you get outside of the grain belt, costs and yield goes down, cost goes up, and it's not very effective. So having these dedicated energy crops in the portfolio opens new regions of the country for biomass production. So the other thing about these crops is that we typically don't recommend using a single dedicated energy crop for any one supply chain. There are a lot of risks in that, and not the least of those is storage. As you can imagine, harvesting a crop, let's say like switchgrass, that has a 4-month harvest window throughout the year, storing that for the other 8 months of the year presents some significant cost challenges. Not to mention you're storing a biological material that has a defined shelf life. And so by combining multiple energy crops, we can take their seasonality to our advantage. I can harvest sorghum during a specific part of the year, switchgrass during another part, short rotation crops during another part, and make that a more of a portfolio approach, and that reduces overall cost and risk. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. The other thing that I haven't touched on is the significant annual revenue to landowners. One of the common questions we get with dedicated energy crops is, are you replacing cropland? And the general answer to that is no. Dedicated energy crops don't compete economically with average or high yielding cropland. So all of the land that we plant our materials on are what we call underutilized lands, so pasture land, land that is laid fallow for a while. And so that land is typically not producing a high revenue for the farmer, and these dedicated energy crops offer them an opportunity to diversify their operation and obtain new streams of income to the farm. And that's very significant in a lot of these regions. That rural economic development aspect provides a lot of value to the supply chain overall. So I mentioned the utilization of multiple crops. The storage of some of these crops, if we were using, let's say, switchgrass as a single feedstock, the storage and loss cost to that is almost $8 per ton per year. If you think of a facility that's using 250, 300,000 dry tons of material per year, that $8 per ton adds up very significantly. And so by moving to that portfolio approach, using multiple crops in your supply chain, you can mitigate a lot of that cost and a lot of that risk. We also see that as a risk mitigation tool in your supply chain, addressing risk to climatic factors, drought. For an example, a lot of these energy crops respond differently. They have different tolerances to drought and other climatic stresses. And the same goes for disease and pest issues. So, it's the old adage that my grandmother always told me, don't put your eggs all in one basket. The same holds true with these dedicated energy crops. We can use multiple crops and reduce risk. And I can tell you that having worked on multiple packages for financing, helping plants get through the financing process and obtain equity capital and debt capital, that risk mitigation becomes very, very important. And that can significantly increase the chance that a business will be successful. The other factor here I mentioned earlier is the annual versus perennial crops. When a landowner commits to producing perennial crops like switchgrass or miscanthus, that's a long-term commitment. We ask our landowners to commit no less than 5 years, and we'd like them to commit to a contract that focuses on 10 years. For a lot of landowners, that's great. It provides consistent income over time. It's fairly straightforward, laid out in the contract what those pricing levels will be. For other landowners, though, making that long of a commitment is something that they're very adverse to. So by having an annual crop like a sorghum that we can plant annually, and maybe we plant it on this acre this year and we move over here and plant it on this acre next year, that introduces a new group of landowners to the production system, those that don't want that long-term commitment but still want to participate. And so we've seen a lot of benefit to that. Additionally, I mentioned it allows you to ramp up and ramp down supply. We're dealing with plant crops in the field. Yield's going to be high one year, it's going to be low another year, and you're going to have kind of this buffer floating out there. And so these annual crops help us to manage that buffer in a very economical way. They're again reducing costs and reducing risk. And so I wanted to show you this chart. This is an actual project that we've developed in the Southeast. And so this is an example of 10 months of direct delivery from the field to the biorefinery without storage. It's pretty unique in that this end user technology can handle multiple different feedstocks in campaigns throughout the year. But as you can see, we deliver switchgrass through the winter months, November through February, during its harvesting window. We harvest some short rotation wood in March and April, deliver that to the facility. And then we can use wheat straw in May and June. So the only gap there we have is July and August. But storing 2 months worth of material as opposed to 10 or even 8 months of material, that's a huge cost savings. And that made a difference in this project actually moving forward. So these feedstock portfolio approaches with dedicated energy crops provide a lot of opportunity for optimizing the supply chain. Bill noted a couple of the machines earlier in his presentation. That was a great introduction. He mentioned the forage harvester that they use to cut the poplar. Every one of those dedicated energy crops that I talked about can be harvested with that same machine. And as a matter of fact, we've done that with that same machine that Bill showed you. So from a capital standpoint, we buy one harvester and we can harvest 4 or 5 different crops without new investment. And so that provides a lot of advantages as well. But these dedicated energy crops, to leave you with a take-home message, and for those of you that know me, getting all this in 12 minutes is about to kill me. To leave you with some take-home messages, one, they open up new regions to biomass productions. They make biomass, the bioeconomy, more accessible to a broader array of landowners around the country. 2, they're real risk mitigators and cost reducers. We can do some really optimized supply chains to provide real-time cost savings to the end user while providing the revenue back to the farm. And they also provide some very high-quality feedstocks. These feedstocks typically come out of the field with very little foreign contamination, dirt, things like that. And so they provide a very clean feedstock for our end users, and they've proven to be very successful around the region. And so with that, I think I'll wrap up, and Bill will introduce the next speaker.